Good morning, everyone. This is Saharsh Damani from FADA. I welcome all of you to this special webinar on knowledge series on the topic building a customer-centric organization. Our key speaker today is Mr. Vivek Sundar. He is the Chief Operating Officer from Swiggy. To begin the session, I invite our President, Mr. Vinkesh Gulati, to kindly give his opening remarks. Vinkesh ji, over to you.
Thanks, Harsh. Good morning, friends. Hope everybody is safe and healthy at home and at your workplace, your team members and all. We are going through a tough time, but we are sure that this too shall pass. So FADA has come up with a webinar series. We have done some more, but this time we have called a real dynamic person, Mr. Vivek Sundar, who is not of our auto trade, but can really give us a lot of inputs. And additional to our trade, he'll also motivate us a lot. So I'll not take more time, and I'll request now Manish Bhai to please introduce Vivek ji so that we can go to the motivation session as fast as possible. Thank you everybody for joining. Thank you Vivek ji for agreeing to come to FADA and do this seminar. Manish Bhai.
Good morning, everyone. Let me introduce our speaker, Mr. Vivek Sundar. Mr. Vivek Sundar is the Chief Operating Officer at Swiggy since July 2018 and has been able to scale Swiggy across India and resulting in their presence in 500 plus cities in just 18 months. Prior to that, he led Procter & Gamble as CEO in East Africa and has worked for 20 years in various capacities across developing, developed, and hybrid markets. Mr. Sundar is passionate about building organizational capability and has been an early adopter and innovator of big data analytics across many sales and marketing roles, infusing it with an understanding of behavioral psychology and cognitive biases to get better results. He is also passionate about photography, and his work has been featured and recognized by media and outlets globally. Mr. Sundar is a postgraduate from IIM Calcutta and is a regular guest lecturer there as well as other premier B schools across the world. So a warm welcome to Mr. Sundar, and let's have his insight towards life and business as such. Mr. Sundar, please.
So may I request Vivek ji, just before you begin your talk, I will request all the members and participants who have joined in to we'll take questions once the talk is over. You are requested to kindly put in your question only in the Q&A box so that we can see all the questions at one place. Vivek ji, request you to kindly start. Thank you.
Good morning. Can you see me? Saharshi, I think the host has stopped my video.
I'm checking how to get this thing organized. Yeah.
I guess I can be seen, right?
Yes. Yes.
Great. Good morning to everybody, and it's a pleasure to be here with you. I mean, I am very happy that the gracious host actually started by asking for people's health. I don't know each of you, but I think it's always a good thing to ask if you are. If you've suffered a tragedy, of course, it's very tough for all of us as Indians. But also, if I'm hoping that the positivity that's there about the second wave, that it's coming on its way down, is also true in your cities. And I know that you're from various cities and calling in. So I just wanted to do a couple of things. One, I wanted to talk about why I basically accepted it, and what was it that triggered it. Two reasons why I accepted this kind invitation from the team, and the first reason is, of course, that I am a customer of yours, right? So obviously I've bought multiple cars over the last 20 years, some of it in India and some of it outside of India, but it's the brands that you sell that I have bought. And therefore, as a customer, talking about a customer-centric organization, I can even wear a customer's hat and say, what is it that I've loved? And what is it that perhaps I haven't loved? Maybe we can do that in the questions. So it's an industry I may not know, but it's an industry I engage with, like millions of Indians out there. So that was one. It's an interesting, I love the industry. I mean, I love cars. I love going to Formula 1 races and stuff like that. So it's obviously an industry I have passion in. And the second reason is that that Mr. MP Shyam had basically called me to talk to a smaller group of people. And then Saharshji reached out to me, and I just said, look, if one small group of people found it useful, potentially that could be useful to a wider sort of audience as well. And when he explained it to me, he was kind enough to call and explain it to me. I was like, yeah, sure, we can spend 90 minutes in giving it back, because I think people like us, all of us, I'm sure will agree, are the product of audio is cutting out abruptly. Is my audio clear?
Your audio is okay, Vivekji. I think the delegate has some connectivity issues. I will try to get it.
Kindly let me know, Saharji or whoever, that if my audio is cutting out, because I don't want to keep droning out here. So that's the sort of second reason, right? One is that I'm a sort of fan of the industry, and the second one is, of course, that illustrious people called me, and I could see that there's a merit. So I do want to thank Saharshji for your call and the kind invitation. Vinkeshji and Manishji, thank you for your pre-meeting with me, as well as for the kind introduction. Thank you again, Mr. Shyam. I think you're there in the audience. I also wanted to say hi to an old friend of mine, Mr. Asim Singh, who he and I have been associated with each other for now maybe 20 years now. So, and I therefore know that many of you may have other business lines, and one of those business lines will be FMCG. So my life in the past was an FMCG life. I did 20 years at FMCG. So I'm sure there is a connection that we have for those of you who are doing the additional job of being an FMCG distributor as well. I mean, I think Mr. Vigneshwar was talking about ITC, if my memory is right. So obviously, lots of friends in ITC. So I think we have a lot in common aside from just being human. So there's a lot of good reasons for me to be here. So thank you. What I'll do is I will essentially be covering this talk in sort of 3 sections, right? I'm really only going to give you the Swiggy story. And through that story, hopefully some of the insights on how to build a customer-centric organization will come to life. And of course, please, feel free to note your questions down as Saharsh was talking about it. We'll handle those questions separately. But just feel free to just type in your questions as you have it. Don't wait till the end to type in your questions at least, right? I'll handle it in the end, but please type it in. So I'm going to start and talk about Swiggy in 3 phases. Phase 1 is the start of Swiggy back in 2014. Phase 2 is the scaling of Swiggy, which was sort of 2018. And then phase 3 is the coping with the pandemic that is now, right? And when I say now, I meant from Janta Curfew a little more than a year ago, 23rd of March, till today, when we are still grappling with the second wave. So through these 3 phases, I'm going to try to bring to life how trying to be customer-centric has helped us sort of stay ahead of the curve and at least not have as bad an impact as we would have otherwise have had if we had sort of stuck to standard formulae and stuff like that. So, and we have enough time for questions. So I'll probably take the next less than an hour, and then we have some time for questions. So 2014, many of you must have heard about this term called first mover advantage. It's taught in business schools sometimes. Business magazines talk about it. The one thing which I wanted to say is that Swiggy did not have the first mover advantage. We were, I think, number 5 or 6 in a very crowded field of 40, food delivery players back in 2014. Many of you will be living in the metro cities. That's where this phenomenon was big. And so essentially there was a lot of proliferation of entities, and we were sort of, number 5 or 6 amongst them. But the smartness and the customer centricity of the original founders is going to be coming to life in what I talk about in this phase of the story. Okay, so what was true, and then many of you would have done food delivery even before 2014. One of the things which I know is that there's a lot of experience in the room. So therefore, many of you have been in adults for over 20, 30, 40 years. So I'm sure you'll know the India before 2014. Food delivery was not invented by us. There was a Domino's that was there that had done food delivery for 20 years. Right? You could always call, email, get onto the website and order from Domino's. And frankly, you had hundreds of thousands of mom and pop restaurants or good restaurants, medium restaurants where you could call and basically say khana bhej do, and the food would come. So there's nothing unique about us in having invented food delivery, because we are not the inventors of it. But what was the friction points that was there? And this is the first aspect of customer centricity that comes in. Just reflect on if you can just mentally reflect on that phase before 2014, you will find the following things were true. First, range, choice, right? Not every restaurant in the neighborhood around you would do food delivery, right? Some would do it, some won't do it. Okay. Number 2, not all of them would be able to do, even if they offered food delivery that says, okay, phone me up and get the food delivered. They may not have a staff waiting because they didn't have a food delivery staff. They were using the waiter staff or the excess staff in the kitchen to basically deliver the food. They didn't actually have a staff that was there because their mainstay was not food delivery. And mainstay was dining. So therefore, it was a very variable experience. Sometimes you would call and sometimes he would say, abhi ladka nahi hai, so I can't send it. Or sometimes he would send it, but then the boy would basically be doing 2 or 3 deliveries, and therefore it'll be, you don't know when it's going to come. So it was very variable. It was sometimes available, it was not, and sometimes late as well. And you had no idea, you had no control over it, or you had no visibility to it, right? The third issue you had was that if something had to be done from very far away, outside of the radius of typical 2-3 kilometer radius, then you could not get it. So even those who were offering food delivery were offering it within a tight radius. They were not offering 10 kilometer. Nobody was offering delivery for 10 kilometers away. So therefore that again made a thing which says, okay, if it's a great restaurant and it's 8 kilometers away, it's not going to be available. These are all problems that the customers faced. Nobody did one, dharna or put up a placard and said, these are the 5 problems I have. But the reality is that when these problems exist, consumers will basically not enter the category. If there are high friction points for a category, consumers will not enter the category. And that's why the category was extremely small. Okay, so to put things in perspective, versus the category today in 2020 or 2021, the size of the category, which is us plus all of the food delivery players put together, till as late as 2013, was less than 1/100th the size of today. Now, many of you, I'm sure, are in markets which are growing, right? More people graduating from bikes to cars and so on and so forth. So the category is growing, or for nothing to bikes and bikes to cars and stuff like that. So to grow the category, you got to eliminate friction points in the category. By the way, there was another friction point that was there, which was that you had to place a minimum order. You had to place at least a minimum order of 200 rupees or 300 rupees or 400 rupees, whatever the restaurant sort of chose as the minimum order. And only then could you order. So if you actually wanted, just a dish to be added to your home cooking, or a single person was trying to order, he would not be able to order because it was very, he had to cross a hurdle. All of these hurdles when the category was less than 1/100th of today, very small. Very few people used to really do food delivery. So these are all the problems that our founders thought about and said, let's solve it. Now, while they were very tech savvy, they didn't immediately throw money and technology at it, right? And this is something which most people think that, oh, the reason the startups are doing well is because they are spending money. They're spending money in what is called the investment phase of the startup's life, which is the middle phase. But that's when consumers, you and I, come to know about it, because that's the phase at which they are spending money. That's when they are visible. That's when they're doing stuff. And that's why we tend to think about them as spending money. They don't spend money before that phase, or they don't waste money before that phase. When they're small, they're essentially trying to prove that there is a case for this. And they obviously don't spend money when they've hit scale and essentially are able to then leverage economies of scale and have to now move towards profitability. The most visible phase of a startup is when it's blitz scaling. And that's when you hear about the fact that it's the same for you. I mean, I'm sure when you start a car dealership in the first year, you're still in investment mode. You're probably not going to make a profit in the first month when you start a car dealership, right? Because you have invested in assets and people and buildings and sort of stuff like that, but you haven't had much sales yet. So it's that phase which most people see and therefore talk about. So they were tech savvy, but they didn't apply heavy duty money and technology and stuff to it. They started with WhatsApp. For the first 6 months, this company started and basically had only WhatsApp, 3 WhatsApps. You to Swiggy as a consumer, you to Swiggy stating what the order is. Another one from Swiggy to the restaurant saying, please take this order. And third one from Swiggy to the delivery boy or girl to say, look, go and pick up the order. Right? So imagine how clunky that is. But that's the way we did it, because we said the big thing we have to solve is we have to make every restaurant available. We have to make them available at all times. We can't say there's no delivery boy. And we have to insource the process of managing the delivery boys, because the restaurant owners can't manage the demand and supply of delivery boys and have idle fleet sitting in there. So essentially, let it be a common fleet that can serve multiple restaurants. With that, the business basically spent 6 months in what we call the early stage or the 0 to 1 stage mode. And when consumers loved it, the reliability, the fact that all restaurants were available, the fact that you could actually do digital payments and so on and so forth, all of that stuff meant that consumers showed intense love, that this is really now a game changer, right? The first phase of so-called customer centricity. And when that happened, then of course, when people think that people know that you have a good idea, then of course investments pours in and interest pours in and stuff like that. And what we call seed money or scale money comes in. So that came in about a few months later. And then the company decided to invest in technology, and then the app that you're used to came in. And then we could also invest in an app for the delivery boys or girls, and then we could also invest in an app for the restaurant partners. And that's the world that you know today was basically put in place 6 to 8 months after we started. And then of course we were scaling, and the scaling journey was slow. Why? Because you had to go to a restaurant and say, I want to do a deal with you for you to download the app and give me a commission on the orders that I'm going to send to you. These are orders that you may not get from your regular restaurants or from your regular customers, or during regular occasions. Many customers may not feel like going out and having the hassle of traffic and the hassle of parking and all of that. So we are going to basically do a deal with you to bring you onto our platform. So it was salesmen or women going and meeting restaurants and bringing them on. And it was same operations folks on the ground recruiting delivery boys and girls. Right? So that phase is actually a phase which takes effort. You have to go to a city, like for example, I was speaking, I think to Mr. Sayes in Jaipur. We went and spent an hour, no, not an hour, a whole month in Jaipur. A team spent a whole month in Jaipur to go and find out which are the good restaurants, which are the good residential areas. How do we bring the restaurants in? Some restaurants didn't want to come in. And so therefore we had to make sure that we do all of those things. It was a very human intensive effort. Now that's that part of the scaling phase. But what was happening is that we were still slowly scaling. So there was like almost a rapid jump and then a slow phase where we were trying to scale using the methods that we knew. And then we realized that, look, that if we keep doing it that way, where it's taking us 30 days to start one city, India is a large country. It will take us literally years and years and years. If you're going to take 30 days to start one city, you're going to take literally decades before we get to any meaningful scale in this country. So we decided to disrupt ourselves again. And what does that mean? We started again listening to we were consistently listening to the customer, but we were constantly seeing if there is a trend that is emerging that's different. One of the things that we saw is this. In 2014, I'm sure none of you would have heard of Swiggy because it was only in Bangalore. So outside of those people who have called in from Bangalore, you wouldn't have heard of it. So if you're in Delhi, you've never heard of Swiggy, right? As a consumer, as a restaurant partner, as a delivery boy, you wouldn't have heard of it. But in 2017, 2018, we were starting to basically do media, a little bit of marketing media, and more consumers were basically getting to know about it, and the flywheel was turning. Word of mouth, flywheel, all of that. People were talking and saying it's a good service, you should use it, and so on and so forth. when we realized that that flywheel is such that awareness of our brand is well ahead of our existing footprint. We were at that time in 8 cities. In January of 2018, we were still in only about 8 cities. When the awareness, demand, and need for our brand is well in excess of your cities, then you don't have to think about a push-based approach to go and convince somebody to come in. So we basically decided to look at a database which we call registered, not purchased. What is it? It's in simple terms, when you download the app, many of the apps that you've downloaded, it'll ask you to register. So when you register your app, you will basically be giving your address because it's a delivery service. On that basis, we were able to see how many postcodes, how many cities, how many towns, how many small kasbas of this country actually have customers that have downloaded the app, registered and given us their address, but not purchased. Because we are saying, sorry, we are not serving in your city yet. When we looked at that and we downloaded that data sometime in summer of 2018, we found that there were 500 plus cities where more than 5,000 people had downloaded the app, seen that we exist, seen that we don't exist, and basically were sort of, yeah, okay, it doesn't serve me. And so if I'm in Asansol, it'll open up and say, oh, maybe it's only in Kolkata, it's not in Asansol, right? Or if Jaipur was already live by then, but Ajmer wasn't. So if I open it in Ajmer, it will basically say, sorry, not serving you yet, right? Coimbatore was on, but Trichy wasn't, for example, right? So across the length and breadth of the country, the small towns, people were opening up, but they were not finding it. Who are these people? Early adopters. Who are those people? Young professionals, more younger demographic, young families, and students. Those are the 3 primary groups that were downloading it, because obviously the need for outside food is high. You're reasonably tech savvy and you're seeking the comfort of having food in your own home. So when you looked at this, we said, look, this is crazy. If 500 cities have a demand at this rate, we will reach there in 10 years. So we said, let's put the model and invert it on its head. So let's ask customers to tell us which restaurants in their cities are good restaurants, which localities are good localities for us to operate. So we actually had consumers tell us where to go, because we are not going to sit here and know which is a good area, which is a good residential area in some city number 500, right? So we asked consumers to tell us that. Sitting in Bangalore, we're not going to know that, right? So we asked them to tell that. The second thing we did was we asked people in colleges. So we actually had a program. This was a specific program where we actually set up campus CEOs, where we asked students to join together in groups of 2 or 3, come and make a pitch on how they will become the CEO for Swiggy in their city. The city being the campus city they're in. So let's say Manipal, for example, it's a campus city. Varanasi, there's ITBHU, it's a campus city. So there are lots of campus cities. Vellore, for example, there's a large campus. Many of our small towns which have universities or colleges, we asked people to come in and present. They presented. We gave them a budget. We said, we'll give you 6 months, launch Swiggy in your city. They're not employees, they're just students, right? But we taught them how to launch. And they're students, right? They're absolutely happy to do an internship and stuff like that in their free time. So we actually started over 200 cities with the concept of having campuses, right? So again, very different. We were talking to consumers, we were understanding the demand and so on and so forth. So we blitz scaled, and that's the phase at which we blitz scaled. So from a place where we were taking 30 days to start one city, because it had to be send a team, go get restaurants, recruit delivery partners, train them, get them the app, train them how to pay, train them all of that stuff. We basically insourced it to say, do it yourself. You teach, you tell us where in your city we need to be, or which cities we need to be. And so with that team, of course, we had a team also supporting them. With that team, we were able to blitz scale. That blitz scaling phase was fast and asset light. We didn't need assets. We didn't need to open city offices at all, because why would I need to open a city office where people are doing the work for us? So we actually added 550 cities in 18 months, right? From one city every 30 days or one city every month. In 18 months at that pace, we would have done 18 cities. But we did 550 cities in 18 months because of this sort of inverting it and looking at the customer demand and customer sentiment and using them to grow it. The other advantage was also the asset lightness. We didn't have city offices in most of those cities. So today we have city offices in only about 25-30 cities. The remaining cities are actually run officeless, remote, right? So when a COVID or something like this hits, there's no problem. There's no city to shut down, or there is no office to shut down. There is no office. It was running remote anyway, right? So we learned how to run cities remote well before the pandemic, 2018. That's like 2 years before the pandemic. So that's the second phase of our growth. Now, obviously that growth has happened. Everything is going fine. We're continuing to scale. We're continuing to grow. And then come the first cases of COVID, and then Janata curfew, and then lockdown. And that was in about 15 months ago, right? We're all, I'm sure we won't forget those dates at all. It must have affected all of your businesses too. Now, when that hit, we had operations in 550 cities. We were largely a food delivery player, right? Picking food from restaurants and giving it to consumers. And basically the government shut it down and said that, while only delivery of essentials can happen, which meant that in over 300 cities, the local district magistrates or the local city administration, local governments, etc., deemed restaurants to be non-essential. Kaun restaurant mein jaake khayega? Restaurant, shut restaurants down. Let people stay in at home. Especially in the small cities, they said, why do you need to eat restaurant food? It's not essential. It's a treat. And therefore shut the whole thing down. So we actually moved to zero business in over 300 cities overnight after Janata curfew. And that lasted for 2 months. So we had two choices. We could either just told the investors that, look, you know what, this is externality. We can't control it. So let's wait and let's keep trying to get the cities to open up and so on and so forth, which we were doing. But the second thing we were doing is to basically say, okay, what's happening around us? And what's happening around us is that consumers are stuck in. Governments are obviously asking consumers to stay safe, both state and central governments and city administrations. We have the customers on an app. So we know what's happening to them because they have us on an app. They open us and check what's happening. They even type out things on the app to give us signals. And only essentials are allowed. So we said, let's pivot. So overnight, we decided to take that technology that we had, the consumers that we had, and the delivery fleet that we had, to allow them to serve, to deliver what was called essentials back then, which is groceries or anything that was considered essentials. And I'm sure many of you have seen lockdown guidelines. Essentials, groceries has always been included. So we said, let's now start grocery stores. Now, we never had any relationship with grocery stores because that was not our business. So every single employee sitting in at home was either Googling the store's phone number or finding out from customers the local Kirana store's phone number and telling them, nobody is allowed to come and shop at you, but you're an essential, so you are there. You probably don't have enough delivery fleet. Why don't you download this app? We'll tell you via video how to become a vendor. And once you become a vendor, we can then have your store's produce be picked up by the delivery boy or girl and sent to the consumer's homes. So that started when 100% of our staff were locked in at home through video, to a group of people that we didn't ever had met, which is Kirana store owners. And then we did that for non-Kirana too, because consumers were telling us, by the way, for about 150 days, we ran daily customer stand-ups. What it means is that me, along with my team, would every day meet at 4 o'clock in the evening and understand what's happened in terms of the operational issues, which city is on, which city is off, COVID cases, all of that. We would also understand what are the customers saying in the last 24 hours. And customers were saying it on social media. Customers were saying it to our call centers on the phone to us. They was asking us on the app. So there was a lot of signals coming in. So obviously I had a team collating all the signals, giving it to us. And we were on that basis making decisions on the fly of what does customer want. So and a lot of good ideas came out of that. So for example, some customers called us and said that, look, we have books in the library for the kids, but parents can't come to the schools because the schools are shut. Can you have your because delivery boys are allowed, can you come to the schools, pick up the books and deliver them to the individual addresses of the kids so that they can at least have books at home? Because obviously since the lockdown, they can't come and we can't open. And so we said, sure. So we started with this in Kolkata, and then over time, we basically did it to 300, 400, 500 schools across the country because we knew this need was there. Similarly, a lot of the artists were finding that they were running out of supplies. Stationery and artists were running out of supplies. So they reached out and said, can you basically provide us supplies? So we reached out to the folks at Camlin and a few other stationery companies and said, look, your warehouses, if you can have them opened up, we can pick it up from your warehouses and send it to consumers' homes. So we connected the warehouses of Camlin to consumer homes. And we did that for so many new services that we must have actually ran over 100 categories, individual categories, stationery, grocery, pet food, non-prescription medicines, etc., etc., etc. Because we said we have consumers on a real-time basis. Time is of essence. They need it in the next 30, 45 minutes. We have fleet on the ground and we have technology. So consumer, technology, operations, merge that together and say whatever is needed, we'll do that. And so during that last lockdown until unlock 1, unlock 2, unlock 3, after October, some of these things waned away because there was full unlock that happened. We created lots of new businesses. Why? Because we were understanding what customers were wanting on a daily, weekly basis. The second thing which we also did during that point of time, the core food business was suffering massively. Some of you who are in Delhi will remember that there was an incident in May where a restaurant in Malviya Nagar, a pizzeria in Malviya Nagar, one of the staff, that was not a Swiggy restaurant, but one of the staff actually had COVID. Just the fact that the staff of a restaurant that is not even on Swiggy has COVID meant that through WhatsApp it spread like wildfire. The business, which was already very poor, tanked even further back in May. So there were two things that we were seeing. Consumers were very afraid of ordering in food. Why? They felt at that time, you'll have to remember it, you'll have to rewind your clocks and go back to last lockdown. They thought food can transmit COVID. They thought packaging material can transmit COVID. They thought the delivery boy or girl can transmit COVID. So why take a risk with three things? Food itself, which may be infected, the packaging material, outer packaging that's been handled, or the delivery boy whose proximity you have to face. Now, we can keep giving them scientific information that the chances of transmission are low, especially for pizza that's been cooked at 400 degrees Fahrenheit, very little chance of failure. Scientific tests have proved that, but then nobody's going to listen to science, when you're scared, like I take a risk, right? So we actually created a bunch of campaigns to solve that. So I'm going to do the following. I'm going to actually just take a little natural break. So I'm going to give you one ad, which is about the first phase of growth, just to sort of, jog your memories of how we started. And this particular thing actually talks about no minimum order. Remember, I said there was a minimum order problem. And then I'll ask Saharshji to wait and play the second ad, which was actually during the pandemic. So why don't you, Saharshji, play the first one, which is the...
Sure. Is the screen visible?
Yes, it's visible.
Okay.
He's looking for a single. And he sneaks one in there. Even the smallest food orders delivered. Swiggy, water delivery.
So just 1 second, Saharshji. So if you notice, this is the original ad. This was 2018. And what does it say? No minimum order. See the screen. And no minimum order can best be exemplified with a small thing called, if you have a craving for a gulab jamun, you can order it. But back then you could never have ordered it, right? So this was part of that thing which I was talking about, which is to say, open the barriers that people have about food delivery and say no minimum order. And that really expanded the category. Of course, this gentleman who's based in Delhi, actually, his name, he's 60 years old. He had a name, or he has a name, but he's now known universally as Swiggy Uncle. Right. So this was the first one. Now I'm going to show you the lockdown series, which is 3 years later. The ad which basically unopened it, and then I'm going to unpeel to you the insight that unlocked food delivery for us. So Saharshji, the second one.
Just give me a moment.
अच्छा, स्विगी शुरू? सर, करोड़ों लोगों ने कर दिया है शुरू। समझाओ यार उनको। स्विगी पे 1 करोड़ से ज्यादा लोग ऑर्डर कर चुके हैं लॉकडाउन के बाद। स्विगी वाटर स्कोर।
Saharshji, you can play the third one as well, and then I'll sort of recap it.
लोग भी तो मंगवा रहे हैं. Shama. And he's calling for a second run. Swiggy पे 1 करोड़ से ज्यादा लोग ऑर्डर कर चुके हैं लॉकडाउन के बाद. Swiggy, what a score.
So you can see that in the first one, of course, is category expansion based on the insights back then in 2014, right? That why people don't order. The second one is specific to lockdown thing. The insight here, we were not, if you notice, there is no scientific information. There is no information that says 400 Fahrenheit ke upar pizza works well, nothing of that sort. Or there is no very little chance because we are actually having, tested, the delivery boys are tested and temperature checks are there and all of that. So we take them off in case of any infection. All of that is scientific information that is not going to move the needle because people are scared. So the insight that we were going after here is when we spoke to people in August, September to say, you started ordering again. Why have you started ordering again? Remember, this is about, again, talking to the customer. And they said, no, for the first 3-4 months I was off. But then I realized that, my neighbor is ordering and, he's been ordering for the last 2 months and nothing has happened to him. Which basically, and I see lots of these boys entering the building, right? Which suggests that it seems to be normal. So there is a behavioral science or a behavioral bias, which is called social proof, that people tend to do what other people are doing and don't apply complete logic to it, which is why if you think about it, if you go to an office where everybody is queuing, you tend to queue. If you go to an office where nobody is queuing, you don't tend to queue. Now, nobody's giving you a rule book about queuing or not queuing. And frankly, even if there's a notice up there that says stand in queue, you're not going to follow that. You're actually going to see what other people are doing and follow that. And that's just a very normal, natural thing to do. So we basically said, crore log order kar rahe hain, thousands of people have ordered, which is factually true. Over 1 crore had ordered. So we actually used that to get the people who were on the edge to come back in. So back then, out of 100 people that had ever placed a food delivery order who were in the category before lockdown, only 20, out of 100 had come back to regularly ordering. That's how depressed the category was during the August-September period. We then went hard at this during IPL. This was actually an IPL campaign, IPL 2020 campaign. And after the 50 days of IPL, 80% of the people who were sort of on the edge, etc., came back. So the business actually bounced back to almost back to pre-COVID levels back in November to December of 2020. Right? Again, customer centricity. So now, obviously, we had multiple businesses and we had brought food delivery back. So when this wave hit, it's natural that we actually are much better resilient to be able to face this third wave. We know how to handle lockdowns. We know how to provide multiple services. And, that's why I think Mr. Sai was talking about the launch of Genie through a newspaper ad in Jaipur today. Genie is a service that basically connects you from place A to place B. You can basically just do any jobs. You can have food picked up from your friend's house and sent to your house. You can do pretty much anything. That service is now being sort of expanded because we knew from last lockdown which are the services that people will need during the lockdown. We also have a resurgent original business, which is the food delivery business. And so today we are in a much better place than we were before the lockdown. Because before the lockdown, we had one business and it was a business that was very vulnerable to these lockdowns and we didn't know how to cope with it. But through the pandemic, through being customer centric and doing literally 150 days of every day speaking to the customer, even now we do it every week, from every day to every week, basically understanding what's going on in their mind and changing what is needed so that we are able to always stay ahead of the game is the reason why we are today in a place where business is back, the resurgence is back and we have new businesses. And so we are far more vibrant than before. And so that's sort of the story I wanted to, obviously these are long stories. I've tried to crunch them into the key parts. So we are at 11:45. That's exactly 45 minutes. One of the things I found in my last chat with Mr. Sham's group is that there was a lot of questions. I wasn't able to handle all of them. So we decided, in fact, Saharji's idea to sort of extend the Q&A period so that we can keep handling questions as much as possible. So Saharji, if it's okay, we can stop and start handling questions.
Sure, Vivek ji. May I request our treasurer, Mr. Sai Girdhar, to kindly moderate the Q&A session. Sai ji, you have a Q&A box. There we'll see members putting in their question. We'll request all the delegates to kindly send your question only in the Q&A box and not in the chat box, please. Over to you, Sai ji.
Thanks, Saharsh. So hi Vivek, it's really a good input that we've received from you, because what I personally understand from the last 45 minutes of your talking is that the primarily focus or the center point of your business has always been customers, and because of customers only, today it's not only delivering food, it is like delivering everything. And probably it's only because you've been customer centric and you're wanting to hear the customer's voice.
Yeah.
So if I correlate it with my with our own auto business, we also tell our sales consultant, we tell our service advisors, boss, please don't apply your minds initially. Please go ahead and only try to analyze customers' need, try to understand what customer is wanting, then probably forcing what you want to sell to the customer.
Yeah.
So it's really a good insight. So probably there's no boundaries for you if you're listening to only your customers. You're not bothered about your competition.
Yeah.
It's a good insight. So I'll just take the first question. I guess it's from our immediate past president. He's talking about Swiggy is phenomenal on customer service. So what's your secret to it?
I don't think there's any secret, unfortunately. The secret is simple. Customers. I think the secret is this, right? I mean, customers can give you. Customers can sometimes state what they want. Sometimes they can state what is impossible to give, and sometimes they don't even state what they want. I think the secret is to basically bucket these into three parts and understand which one is which. Because it is the customer centricity is not listening to everything the customer says. If you listen to everything the customer says, they'll want food delivery in 1 minute and for free. That's neither possible nor financially sensible, right? So it's important to understand what customers really want, and have stated it, and be able to put it into a stack rank of what needs to be done. Therefore, a priority of what needs to be given. It's also equally important to understand what they have not said. And that's where inciting functions and consumer insights and behavioral science functions will come in. And it's equally important to understand what customers are saying that they want that is not givable, and how do you handle that? Because it's not possible to give everything that customers want. So I think the art and science of bucketing the customer asks into these three buckets, stated and unstated, and then to send the rest of the company to work on those priorities is really the secret of building a customer-centric company.
Yeah, thanks, Vivek. So the second question is from Sujoy Gupta. He's saying, hi, Vivek. The intro talk of yours is so interesting that I can't wait to ask this question. What are the friction points in the automobile service? And will these friction points make the likes of pit stops and Go Mechanic hurt auto dealership business, and more importantly, profitability?
Sure. So, Sanjoyji, I don't pretend to know your business. But as I was telling Mr. Sai, that I am a very happy customer of one of the brands that he sells. Saiji, correct me if I'm wrong. I did remember Volvo in your list.
Yeah.
So I'll tell you the difference is, as for I'm going to say something that for many of you will sound like it's not true, but just bear with me while I tell you that. Customers don't really understand, RPM, torque, okay, they understand fuel efficiency, but they don't understand what is fuel efficiency at high gears and low gears and all of that stuff, right? So essentially, when a customer is choosing to buy a car, yes, the budget range is something that they have decided. The fact that they choose a brand versus another brand is not as rational a decision that as we may think. Within a range, they will make what is called a decision that is a combination of rationality and emotion. Sure, if it's a great car, then of course the function is going to appeal to the rational part of me about speed or fuel efficiency or cost or whatever it is, right? Whatever is good about that car. But within a band, like obviously nobody who's thinking about a 3 lakh car is going to buy a 30 lakh car. And therefore nobody who's thinking about a 30 lakh car is going to even consider a 3 lakh car. But within a range of budget and requirements, family size requirements, etc., they're going to actually make more of an emotional decision than a functional decision. And this, I know, may sound ridiculous to you, but here's a simple question. If I was planning to buy a nice family car that has got lots of technology in it, and it's, let's say, in the 30 lakh range, The reality is that there could be 5 or 6 cars that would be within a range of acceptable thresholds when it comes to who's providing the best technology. So if I'm, between, let's say, BMW and Audi and Volvo and stuff like that, right? I'm saying 30 to 40 lakh range, in that range. Now, and then of course, there's the first hand versus second hand sort of story. Okay, my data is a little old, but now the prices may have moved up, but just think a little bit about what I'm saying. The point here is the quality of the word of mouth that is there, the brand, the image that you have formed, that ye dealer bahut acha hai and after sales bahut acha hai, is a factor. The quality of the brand itself in terms of the positives that, their spares take a lot of time or they always seem to have spares will make a difference. The quality of their, all of that stuff will make a difference. But what eventually will move the needle, that will not prevent you from not meeting 3 car salespeople, 3 brand people. That may bias you, but you'll still say, chalo 3 logon ko mil leta hu. The thing that will move the needle is the quality of that salesperson in terms of their interaction, his or her interaction with the customer. And as rational as all of us think we are, we make decisions on the basis of that final interaction that we had with the car and how customer centric that partner was. So I have to say, and I've said this, I think Mr. Frump is the MD, right, of Volvo, if my memory is right.
Yeah, he was earlier. Now it's Jyoti Malhotra.
That's right. So when Mr. Frump was in charge, I bought my car when he was in charge. I wrote to him saying, great customer service, very happy with the dealer and with the salesman. So, I wrote to him. Now, I didn't write a note saying good work by your engineers in Sweden. I didn't. I mean, sure, good work by his engineers in Sweden for sure. But I wrote to him about remember, he comes from the Volvo company. So he's obviously, the same company owns, R&D and engineers and production and manufacturing, but also the people here. So I actually gave him feedback for that. And I said, this lady, I'm a busy person. She was willing to come with the car to wherever I was. Literally wherever I was. She said, just tell me where you are and I'll come. I'll be like Swiggy. You tell me where you are, I'll come where you are. Okay. She was willing to tell me to wait because a new model was being launched. She wasn't passing off an old model just because of something. She said, wait for 2-3 months. The new one is getting shipped. It's actually got much better electronics. The mechanics are the same and the mechanical parts are the same, but the electronics are better. So it may, work with your smartphone. So just wait 2-3 months if you're willing to wait. I said, I'm willing to wait, but then I'm not willing to not have a car. And you know what she said? She said, if that's okay, if you're able to confirm it for me that you're going to buy it, I'll give you a test drive car for 20 days that you have to wait and you don't have a car.
Oh,
do you really think I was going to not wait for 20 days if she's going to give me a test drive car for 20 days? Provided, of course, I commit through a prepayment and fill up the form. I mean, basically commit to pay. And she wasn't giving it for free. So I think, and then after that, she's in sales. Every time I have a car problem, I can always reach out to her. I don't need to reach out to service. I can reach out to her. She'll manage the back end for me. That's not her job, I think. Okay. Similarly, and by the way, after some time, I found customer service was fine. So I would reach out to customer service. One day she called me and she said, I believe your car has come to the workshop. So I said, yeah. She said, but you didn't tell me. I said, what was the point? It's just a simple change. I spoke to customer service. It got done. She said, no, sir, I told you to tell me. Anyway, I've told the office every time your car comes in, I should be told. The mechanics of the car. If you ask me right now, what is the brake horsepower of my car? Yeah, I may be able to tell you because I'm a bit of a car geek, but otherwise I don't care. Who is using all that brake horsepower in Bangalore traffic? Let's be honest, right? But the customer service made a difference. And this is why I was telling some of the teams that, look, the buying and selling aspect may move online, but what is very difficult to move online is this intimate understanding of what this person wants. Okay, she asked me about my bank account. She said, is there, you must have a relationship manager. I can give you financing, but I can check with your manager if he's going to give you better financing because you have a credit history with them. She was literally the epitome of customer service. I'll give you the most amazing part. About a year ago, I reached out to her. Right? No, not a year ago, maybe 6-7 months ago during the lockdown, I reached out to her and said, hey, just wanted to let you know, car hasn't been driven for a while. So now that unlock has happened, I just need to send it back to the garage just to have a check because it hasn't been driven for a while. And so she said, cool, no problem. And she managed it. I mean, she basically said, okay, I'll have somebody come and pick up the car, blah, blah, blah. But you know the funny part? She wasn't working for Volvo anymore. She never told me that. Oh. After that, she told me, by the way, I wasn't working for Volvo. I had moved on to some other company, but I told my colleagues to take care of it. The funny thing is she doesn't work for Volvo, and yet I have a positive image of the dealer. In this case, Marshall Motors, of the dealer because of that. Right. So I genuinely think that technology is a massive thing. You can actually have people looking for cars, all of that kind of stuff. They can even have a relationship with the car, all of that kind of stuff. I mean, today my car tells me that it's running low on gas or running low on air pressure. Sure. Those are technologies that are going to come soon, if not already there, right? My car already has it. But that's eventually that is going to become a point where you have to be there, otherwise you're going to lose. But the icing on the cake, that's the cake. The technology, the fact that it's on now in all of our lives is the reason why I'm able to do this talk with 229 of you. And it's a powerful technology. But the human touch and what humans can provide on top, the icing on the cake, is the customer service that I was referring to. So I do think that Pro Pit Stop, Go Mechanics, I don't know their business. Remember, I don't know your business, but I said I am a car aficionado. I love my cars. I've driven a lot of good cars in my last 25 years of driving. I do think that the impact of technology is there, but customer service, the way the customer looks at it, if you guys were to provide, it's very easy to just hold them on. Like today, if I were to rebuy my car, the first thing I would go to them and say, I've been happy with my car, but it's time for an upgrade. Can I do a trade-in? Can I give you my old car and can I buy the new model? Maybe the electric one or whatever, right? So that's my first place of call. I'm not going to be going to somebody else. Sorry, long answer, but
you're absolutely no. It's actually required. So the mantra is again the customer centric and to know your customers and his needs. I'm in sync with you. And since we have the spare parts, we have the know-how, we know exactly what the customer wants. So probably if we just take care of his basic needs, we'll be able to retain those customers and take on these people head on.
By the way, it's totally true. Like many of our cars have been just stuck in the garage, right? Lockdowns and stuff like that. This lady also called me and said, sir, this is a new technology car. You don't have to keep starting your car every week to just keep the battery in good shape. You don't have to take that. Because obviously I've been old person, or any old person will know that you have to take the battery off and do all sorts of jumper business and all of that. She said, don't worry, it should be fine. Just, you shouldn't have to worry. They have much better technology than what you're used to, which is true. I actually started my car after a while and started fine. And then of course I sent it to the garage because it had not been driven, but it was amazing that she told me proactively that don't worry during lockdown.
So I'll just move on to the next question because there are a lot of questions. So next question is an interesting question, in fact, because see, in auto industry also we are probably forced, or we also want to be more digitalized, more on the social platform than depending on the traditional ways of advertising on newspapers. So the next question is from Ravi Srinivasan. It's like, how much time did it take you to develop a user-friendly app and how effective it is, and the percentage of spends of your investment for developing the app and other investments through social media and etc.?
So the app, of course, was developed in 2018, right? 2014. So we do it in-house, right? This is a technology company. This is a product and technology company with operations. So we have it in-house. We don't give it to a vendor to do it. I mean, I guess you may be using vendors to develop the app. In our case, we do it in-house because we know that every now and then we have to either debug the app. You may be getting a lot of new release, etc. So we debug the app, but also most importantly, we give new features all the time. So we are shipping new features maybe 2-3 times a month, sometimes more, sometimes less. And that is why we actually have it in-house. So if you're asking what is the percentage of spend for developing the app, that's a little hard to answer because I'm not giving it to a vendor and then computing that cost as a percentage of my spend. It is employees who are doing it. We actually do it in-house. So we have a technology team. And I think that depending on your business, you may choose to keep it in-house or do it outside. But I think as powerful and as diverse an organization that FADA is, and I don't know much about FADA, my mistake, but or my lack of knowledge, but I do think that you can probably think a little bit and brainstorm around whether we can actually have either an in-house or actually at scale a contract with a vendor to be able to help develop it for so many vendors, so many sort of dealers that are there. Why do you want every dealer to spend their own time, energy, effort to develop an ad? It will be poor quality and the cost will be not affordable. Better off in trying to develop a platform level app, which can then be customized for each dealer and that can then be used by the dealer. That may be a better suggestion, but again, I don't know your business well enough, so take this suggestion with a pinch of salt. I don't know your business very well.
So one thing, do you have a specific amount of spend that you do on social media, or
we of course spend time on we spend money on social media, but remember our sorry, somebody has told me how to pronounce FADA. What is it?
FADA.
Okay, sorry, I'll do that.
Yeah.
Okay, like
that's fine. That's fine.
Okay, so I'll call it FADA. So how much time? Sorry, social media. We do spend a bit of our money on social media. See, the percentage actually depends on the month, year, occasion, scale. So, for example, at a time when people were locked in and they were scared of food ordering, we had stopped social media advertising. What is the point of telling somebody to buy something when they are? This is like, imagine an airline company trying to do advertising at a time when you're worried about catching COVID inside the plane. There's no point. I mean, either the government has shut you down, or even if you're running planes, there's no point. So we were down to zero. But in normal world, we spend no more than a few single-digit percentages on advertisement. But of course, it goes up very high at a time when you're doing major campaigns. So IPL, for example, it can go 20-30% up, because obviously that's the time when we are trying to bring customers in. Because remember, IPL is in that sense almost been made for food delivery, because the match is in the evening, right? You don't want to be sitting in the kitchen and cooking if you are the cook. You don't want to be going out and eating out when there's a match that is on. And therefore, it's the perfect occasion, dinner time, to sit, order a food, it comes in, you eat, you don't have to worry about cooking or going out. So IPL for us is a big one. It's like, for many people, Diwali is a big season. I suspect for the auto industry also, Diwali may be big. For gold, Diwali is big. So for us, that's IPL. So during IPL, it goes up a lot. But on a steady state, it's single digit.
Okay, that's fine. So I'll just move on to the next question. Next question is from Nihas. So Nihas is wanting to know how you recruit delivery boys in local regions and how the training are given at these remote locations.
So we have what we call sourcing and onboarding teams. So we also use outsourced partners for that. So what we do is we basically have our own teams doing recruiting. We recruit through various means, SMS advertising, through newspaper ads, word of mouth. There's a whole what is called multi-channel recruiting system. And then once they are recruited, they are then put through a sort of an onboarding system for a few days. And then because it's relatively unskilled, you don't have to have too many skills. It's relatively unskilled. The training is relatively quick. And then they get on to being on probation. They start the job. And then after a few months, if they are doing well, then they continue to stay with us. And then, of course, then the incentives and everything else sort of kicks in, both the short-term and the long-term incentives. So that's really what it is. It's not that difficult. The only difficult thing is doing it at scale, because we do it across 550 cities, and doing it all the time, because it's a very tough job. It's not easy. Most people are doing, lot of, 150 plus kilometers on a bike every day is not easy, right? And that, remember, they're doing it through rain, through, bumpy roads, late night, all of that. So it's not an easy job. So most people don't. Some people stay with us for 4, 5, 6 years. And they've stayed with us forever. But most people actually come in and leave, because a lot of them are also students moonlighting. There's a lot of students who will say, Subeh, I'll do my college, and Shamko, in the dinner peak time, I will basically earn some extra pocket money by doing deliveries. I have a bike, let me do that. So many of the dinner deliveries are done by students who are moonlighting and earning an extra pocket money.
So Vivek, here I like to get something more out of you on this, because see, it's related to our business also. Like we all know that Swiggy is customer centric. The customers who are actually dealing with Swiggy are 100% satisfied. In our business also, the touch point is the sales consultant and the service advisors. These are young people. How do you inculcate the customer centric approach, and how do you sort of maintain that same level of service through them? So is it based on incentives, and how do you judge whether these people are actually providing the level of service which is required from them?
So one clarification, Saiji. We would like to say that 100% of our customers are satisfied, but it is far from the truth. The reality is that 1,200 people I mean, first of all, lakhs of people call our call center and complain about something that has gone wrong, something that may be Swiggy's fault or restaurant's fault, but doesn't matter. They'll still complain to us, right? So it means that we actually have a lot of dissatisfied or unhappy customers. In fact, 1,200 of them are so pissed off that they go to social media and rant every day, right? But the reason why I know how many lakh are complaining and the fact that 1,200 people actually post on Twitter, etc., is because we actually have a machine to monitor that sentiment. Okay, and I wanted to actually talk about that because that feedback then goes back to the system to improve the system, or to the employee to improve the system. The fact that this is a company that is measuring every single transaction and every phase of that transaction, okay, is the reason why we know where the problems are and where the frictions are, and therefore what to do. So for example, you're in Jaipur. If there was a tech outage in Jaipur, that is not the restaurant's fault or the delivery boy's fault. A tech outage is usually Swiggy's fault. It could be one of our technology partners, but it's usually Swiggy's fault. If that happened in Jaipur, and it happened basically within about an hour, there would be a thing that says, between 8:27 p.m. and 8:47 p.m. there was a tech outage in Jaipur. So many customers were impacted. They placed their orders but had to cancel because there was an outage. Therefore, we are essentially doing what we call recovery service, which is all those individual customers who tried to place an order but kept getting frustrated are going to be given some kind of a apology or a coupon. And parallelly, a team is set together to fix that problem so that tech outage doesn't repeat itself, right? So, and that's a tech outage, right? Which is early on when you're opening the app itself. Let's say there was a coupon application failure. You tried to apply a coupon, but that failed. Or you made a payment, but that failed. Or you basically got every single failure, and we have literally millions or lakhs of them every day. We basically put it in a system, measure it, have metrics against it, have individuals owning those metrics. And if it's a people issue, then we will basically handle it at the people level. If it's a technology issue, we'll handle it at the technology level. If it's a process outage, then we'll handle it at the process level. If it's with one of our partners like the restaurant, we will give it to the restaurant. So for example, I can tell you in Jaipur, which restaurants don't ship the food with good quality packaging, as a result of which hot food keeps leaking. Right? And because I know that, the salesman will basically go and say, look, the last 17 orders, 4 of them actually had leaks. Customer complained about it. So it can't be the delivery boy, because this delivery boy has delivered hundreds of other orders. He's not leaked it. So it's a problem with the packaging. You may want to change your packaging. Right? When I say it to you, it seems obviously relatively simple, but the fact that it's happening for over 10 lakh orders every night, right? Every night there are 10 lakh orders or so. I mean, every night when you close the day, over 10 lakh orders have happened. And the fact that we are monitoring each of them, monitoring gaps in each of them, telling each person, that whole machine is the answer.
And, one more thing, it's basically from my side, it's my query. So in our business, there are occasions wherein we know that the customer is wrong, or probably the customer is wanting something which is which is out of the box, or probably it's the customer's fault. But still, in those cases wherein it's customer's fault, probably he's ordered something wrong and he's expecting something else. So what exactly you guys do?
We don't do that. We don't do a good enough job of it. I have to admit that, Saiji, because I know by the way, I personally spent time every third Friday. I would spend 5 hours in the call center, listening to calls, speaking to the personally, right? And obviously now lockdown, it's a little bit difficult to do. But before that, I was essentially doing it. We used to call it golden hour. The team used to lead that. And what they would do is they would analyze. They would basically play out I would first go in for live calls and see how people are doing. I will then have the team also every week present what is the top issues that were badly handled as seen by the customer, or as seen by the supervisor here. And we would analyze it, and we would basically say, what's a better way of handling it? So I do want to tell you with that experience, we don't always do a good job of that when the customer is at blame. And there are 2 bad jobs that we do. And both exist, both coexist. One is, we just randomly say that our customer se kaun jhagdega, let's just give the coupon to the customer, even though it's the customer's entirely his fault. Now, why is that bad? First, of course, it costs us money. It's not, we didn't have to give him that coupon and so on and so forth. But secondly, it trains the customer to say, "Chalo, ye to bahut aasan hai. I can just complain about this and get the whole thing for free." So it just trains wrong behavior, and he may then tell another person, and then bad behavior spends. So what was done in good faith ends up being, abuse or fraud or whatever like that, or worse still, basically just reinforces bad behavior, which is not a good thing for any industry or company. The second thing that is bad is that we basically start fighting with the second type of bad handling is that the person realizes that it's entirely the customer's fault, and then he starts fighting with the customer. And it's clearly your fault. I can prove it. I have data, this and the other. So that's also bad, because that obviously is not going to be a good way to retain that customer. The middle path is the one which we keep training our agents on, which is you must never just give it away without informing the customer that you've done a one-time exception and so on and so forth. The next time it won't be allowed type of thing. So that's the training we do. It's not perfect, but that's the intent. We basically check and we measure that the customer was at fault. If the customer had a track record of basically decent orders, that means we know he's not generally fraudulent, but clearly the customer is at fault. We allow the agent to give that exception, but not without telling the person that, look, sir, we understand you're angry. This is actually not something you had ordered. You had actually placed an order for X. We have delivered X. You can't in a food delivery business say that you meant Y and all of that, because the X has come to your house. I mean, you can't order samosa, it's come to your house, and then you say, I wanted kachori. I mean, then you should have ordered kachori, right? So it's clearly samosa, you can see in the app. But we understand that you're upset and we trust you because you've done so much of business with us. So this time we'll give you a coupon for the mistake. But next time, sir, I won't be able to authorize to give it to you. Very rarely will an honest customer ever make that mistake again. Because now, by the way, and then the system will tag the first fact that that customer has been given an exception.
Okay.
Right? Because that's the right period. No, not this, which is to start fighting with the customer, and not this also, which is to just give it for free without telling him what is the case. So that middle, it requires a lot of training. We're not good at it. That's why we say we make these two separate types of mistakes a lot. The objective is to try to avoid this error or that error and get to that middle point.
So we all do that. It's common to every trade wherein you're servicing the customers, and as you rightly said, it's the middle part which we should focus on. Yeah. Absolutely right. I'll just take the next question. It's how are you able to compete with Zomato?
So I mean, Zomato actually has very good people. They're actually a good company. They used to do a few things that we still don't do as well as them. First of all, they started in the 5-6 years before us. So they're actually a much older company. And they started with what is called food discovery and reviews and ratings. So many of you would know that you can open a Zomato app and know about a new restaurant or the ratings of a restaurant or the menu and so on and so forth. So they were very good at that restaurant discovery. That's how they started. Later on, they added a few more services like, you can book a table and stuff like that, and also place an order. They originally started doing delivery by actually sending the order to the restaurant and the restaurant doing the delivery on their own. But obviously, as I told you in the beginning of this talk, that's not going to be useful because the customer then has to do Matha Fodi saying, I sent my order to Zomato, but now I have to follow up with this boy who's on the street, but nobody knows who he is because the order has been relayed to the restaurant and I don't have a relationship with the restaurant as a customer, right? So as a result, they then acquired a company and then brought delivery in-house, just like Swiggy. And since then, they've done a pretty good job. So we are neck and neck competitors. And I would say that it's a classical competition thing that you're familiar with. I mean, every decade has its sort of competitors, right? So there was, call it in the 90s, it was Coke versus Pepsi. 2000s, it was probably Airtel versus Vodafone, and so on and so forth. So there's always, two people who are really good who keep fighting. We have respect for them, but how do we compete? Remember, the key is to look at the customer. If the customer is unhappy with you, it doesn't matter that competition exists or doesn't exist. You have to fix it. So if you fix it, chances are they'll be happier with you than with competition.
I remember reading your mantra, forget about the competition, just focus on your customers.
Yeah, because you don't know what's happening, what the customer is planning to do, the competition is planning to do. No? So it's better to just focus on
Yeah. So the next question is, how do you validate WhatsApp service? I don't know what's it.
Back when, 2014, but frankly, it was running at such small scale, we didn't have to worry about validating it. It was such a small thing. Okay. It is like if you live in a colony and you have one lady who says, "Aap mujhe WhatsApp pe order bhej dijiye, I will send you some meal." You don't validate all of that. It just runs in an artisanal format basis trust. That was the pre-scaling phase that we were running WhatsApp for. But it proved that if you are reliable and you're able to provide all restaurants, it did what we call proof of concept. There is a term called proof of concept. It proves that there is a need that when fulfilled, you can make money on. And then you put technology and money and resources and scale it.
Okay. Next question is from Colin. He's wanting to know how Swiggy manages to check temperature of delivery boys before they reach the restaurant.
So, so we have temperature checks every 12 hours, I think, now, which means twice in one shift. They have to get checked. If they do more than that, they have to get checked more than that. We also obviously have RT-PCR testing in many cities, and now of course we started getting them vaccinated. So the temperature check was something we put in place in the last lockdown, wave 1. What we did was we tied up with folks at restaurants, at health centers, and a few assorted places. I mean, whoever at that, remember this was during lockdown, so we were like, whoever is willing and available to do it. And we went and tied up with them to basically run a temperature check system and an audit system. And then on that basis, the person would do, the D would not do it himself. This person who we are tied up with will do the check, upload it. Then through our servers, it will go onto the app so that when you order as a consumer, you can see delivery boy X with temperature Y is basically coming to you. So that's the system we had put in place so that we are able to detect anybody who's sort of sick a little early and send him on or her on a sick leave, and on 14 days of containment and quarantine, and obviously also hospital if needed. We do have a system to help them both with insurance as well as hospitalization, and now with insurance with vaccination. So the check was through restaurants and through other entities that were trained for this task.
Okay, that's good. Excellent. So the next question is from Mr. Ajay Agarwal. So he's our regional director for Delhi and FADA. He's saying, hi Vivek, this is Ajay from Delhi Trio Tata. How do you manage trade-off between customer centricity and survival during cash crunch phases?
Sure. So first of all, hello Ajay. I think I may have bought a car. My first car that I bought was in Delhi, so it must have been from your empire, as it were, right? This was 98, so some time ago. I think the answer is relatively, it's difficult. It's not an easy one, but I do think that if you think a little bit about what customers are thinking and doing, you also get a very good idea of what they're willing to pay for, that they weren't originally going to pay for in the pre-pandemic era. So for example, right now you're locked in. You're not really looking to order in because of discounts, right? Because you're locked in. It's a semi-essential service for you to order in. So now, if you go to the restaurant, you get it at the price at which the restaurant talks about it. If you buy from Swiggy, yeah, sure. When there's a competition on and life is normal, you can spend money on discounts. But during lockdowns, discounts came down because there was no need for discounts, and we were basically spending the money to support our delivery fleet and do all this other stuff, medical and temperature checks and masks and health insurance and everything else, because that is what was needed, and spreading the business into other essential businesses. So the reality is that when we looked at the fact during what customers were willing to pay for, we found that actually propensity to pay went up during the pandemic because we were providing essential services. So we didn't need to, we didn't change prices and start price gouging them. We didn't say that, like the famous stories that you hear about that like ambulance ka service 5,000 rupiah hai. We didn't do any of that. But we just said, look, this is not a time to be able to do, we don't have the ability to be able to do discounts and spend money in this and so on and so forth. So we cut what was non-essential discounts, advertising. Remember I told you we cut advertising. What's the need to advertise when there is an inherent demand for using food delivery or any kind of delivery? So we cut advertising, cut discounts, cut a few of the other frills, shut down our offices, gave up some of our offices. We also had to do layoffs. It's now public domain. We did it last year. So we had to do a lot on survival, but we still maintained as much customer centricity as we should, because what they were then saying is, I need you to be available and be able to do the service, and I'm willing to pay fair wages or fair pay for that. And fair pay is lack of discounts. If I suddenly change prices, we didn't touch pricing. If you had changed prices up, people would have complained like we complain about these, ambulance drivers who said, for 3 kilometers, I'm going to charge you 5,000 rupees, which is stupid.
This is so true for our business. So if we manage to retain our dealer margins and without compromising on customer service, I think we are home. Yeah. That's what I think. Ajay, this answers your question quite well. I'll move on to the next question.
Which you don't even know of, but it basically was something that we either felt the customer will be okay with, or the customer didn't even see. The customer didn't see that we were having an office or not having an office. So if we aggressively closed out all our leases and shut down all the offices and stopped paying rent, sure, it improved our survival ability, but it didn't touch the consumer, right? Okay. Discounts, of course, touches the consumer, but we felt they'll think of it as acceptable to cut discounts during this pandemic. So we did both customer facing and non-customer facing.
Okay, that's great. So I'll move on to the next question. It's from Mr. Bala Subramaniam. It's how often do Swiggy accesses the competition and what are the methods you follow to access competitors?
So we are a young company and there's a lot of, ambitious, aggressive people we have in the company. So we do keep a very close watch on what competition is doing because as I said, they are a good competitor. So it's not like they're a bad competitor. But I think the job of leaders often is to let the people fight the street battles that they need to fight, but keep the company focused on the customer versus the competitor. It's very easy to get sucked into the competitor because see, here is the thing. Let's assume that the competitor does, 5 things right and 5 things wrong. If you just keep following the competitor, you are going to add 5 wrong things also.
Yeah, you're right.
What is right? What is wrong? Wrong is what the competitor did that the customer didn't like. So if you are essentially saying that, look, the competitor did 10 things, 10 things they did, 5 of which the customer liked and 5 of which the customer didn't like. Why are you following those 10? Why don't you figure out what the 5 the customer wants and just do those rather than copying the 5 that the customer eventually didn't like? So it's a very easy thing to follow competitors. It's a very tough discipline to have. I don't think we're always able to balance it, but I think it's fair to say that we do a lot by just following the customer.
Yeah, that's your mantra. We get it now. So next question is from Jamshedpur. Alok Singh, he's wanting to know, is grocery services still on?
So some cities, the grocery services, a lot of cities, grocery services are still on because lockdowns are on. City administrations have asked us to run grocery services, both outsourced as well as, basically from Kirana as well as from our own sort of internal grocery service, which we call Instamart. Jamshedpur specifically, I don't know, but I do know that in many of the cities, over 100 cities, grocery services are on.
Next is an interesting thing. It's from Sumit Soni. I believe he's into two-wheeler dealership and he's wanting to know from you that how he's supposed to increase the inquiry and then from increasing the inquiry is conversions for retailing more two-wheelers.
Okay, so this is where your expertise is 1,000 times greater than mine on this topic. But let me put it this way. One easy way is that if we do well, then you will do well because all 100% of our deliveries are on two-wheelers. So that's one easy answer. You just go in the morning and whichever is your God, you pray that Swiggy, Zomato do well because your inquiries on two-wheelers will spike because all of them have to bring their own two-wheelers. We don't buy the two-wheelers. It's basically bought by the delivery fleet. But on a more serious note, I don't know enough about what is the trigger for either upgrade of a two-wheeler, because when you buy a two-wheeler, you're either upgrading an old two-wheeler or entering into the two-wheeler market for the first time. There are only 2 types of people who are buying it for the first time and people who are upgrading so I don't know what the friction points are with older two-wheelers for what is the trigger for upgrade. And if I were to basically had that perspective, customer-centric perspective, I'd be able to tell you how to focus your efforts at increasing the inquiry and therefore improving the chances of conversion. The same way, I don't know what is the triggers that act. One of the triggers I can think of is when a child leaves home for the first time and sort of goes and stays in their own city, either for work, first-time work, or maybe for college, is maybe a time when an inquiry happens for a two-wheeler. So actually trying to figure out a way where you understand that point of market entry and basically attack that point of market entry. For example, I don't know of any, I mean, maybe you guys do that. This is a large organization, FADA, so it's possible you do that. But if you were to think about all those people who got an admission to, let's say, a large campus, you know, I don't know, say, since the last gentleman called from Jamshedpur, you know, either Kharagpur or Jamshedpur. I mean, these are large campuses where thousands of students come in every year to study. When they come in to study for the first time, the reality is, what are the kind of things they're likely to need? One of them might be a two-wheeler. Right? Not all of them will buy it, but maybe even 10% may buy it. I don't know, for example, if you actually have a method where you are able to catch them at the point at which they enter the city and essentially are able to sell two-wheelers. So all I'm saying is, if you think customers' life stage, needs, and put them on a whiteboard and basically chalk it out, you should be able to figure out where the need exists, but the distribution doesn't, or where the need doesn't exist, but we can create that need through good marketing, and then create a whole campaign around going after that. I would think that, I mean, for example, I would think when I went to my engineering college, there were like 3,000 students. Many of them had bikes. I think it was not a, let me give you an example of what actually does happen. When do you think the first time people buy a suit, aside from if they were buying it for their wedding? They buy it when they're actually going for their final year placements, interviews. That's the first time you buy a jacket or a blazer or a suit. So Raymond's and all these guys would set up stalls on campuses. Like, not worrying about, no, Raymond will go to the campus, set up a stall, have a tailor, and basically we sell it and just adjust it, because of course you need these to be well fitting. There'll be a tailor, he'll adjust it and he'll give it to you. Now, if that is going to happen, you know, let's say Park Avenue is doing it or Raymond's is doing it, do you not think that they will have greater market share amongst those people? So thinking a little bit about the customer, their life stage, their journey, their needs, etc., will give good insights into that. I'm not in your industry, so I cannot give you good answers, but I'm maybe helping you think about it.
No, you're absolutely right. It's more of not sitting in your showrooms and waiting for the inquiries to come in. It's more like going out in the market, understanding where your customer is and targeting those customers. They're absolutely right in this. So the next question is, it's like reward. It's based on reward and recognition. So how do you reward and recognize your Swiggy partners or restaurants? On how do you and what do you do when you have strings of poor ratings from those restaurants? And also, he thinks that there are only 5 to 10 customers who are rating on Swiggy. So how do you encourage more of your customers to share genuine feedbacks?
So, I mean, it's a good question. I don't know whether the answer to the question is a good one. I think we still not do as good a job as we should on this topic. So we have a system by which restaurants are rated by the consumers. And on that basis, and there are some other operational parameters that we have in the restaurant metrics, like speed of food preparation, quality of packing, all of that kind of stuff, you know, handing over food, wrong items, mismatches. There's a whole set of operational metrics. We do have a reward and unreward system in place. It's not a penalty, it's a reward. It's if you do well, you get a reward. If you don't do well, you don't get the reward. So it's an incentive system that we have in place. And because we have every single transaction tracked, it's very, very precise for us to do it, because obviously there's not a single transaction that's not on a database and measured. So that for the restaurants is there. On customers, yes, you're right. Very few customers actually rate on Swiggy. But I think the point is this: if you actually think about why you don't rate, you don't rate because you're like, you know, why do I need to rate? Why do I need to rate? You usually rate when you've had a great experience or a really bad experience. You don't rate if you just had a normal experience. There's nothing to worry about, right? So actually the 5 to 10% customers who are rating are sort of non-representative of the population. They're either what is called disproportionately happy or disproportionately sad. So what we do is we obviously keep nudging them to give more feedback. But in addition, because we know that there is a vast majority of population that is not rating, we actually do a lot of surveys separately with them. The system we use is called NPS, Net Promoter Score. It's a very popular system used in most customer-facing organizations. I know that the auto industry uses it because in the US, I have heard of NPS being used as a core metric as well, both from a dealer as well as from a car brand owner point of view. And I think that system is a very good system for many companies, including us, to figure out how we are doing vis-a-vis customers. And then of course it has double clicks in terms of what they're happy about or what they're not happy about. So we use the NPS system to measure across all customers and not just the ones who are only giving feedback at that point of time in the app, and therefore basically we're not getting full data.
That's great. Huh? So next question is, how do you keep your team motivated despite conflicts and obstacles?
This is a question from Shriyat, right? Shriyat.
Yeah, Shriyat, yes.
I can see the screen is very small. So I don't think we do a good enough job of that, honestly. Why is that? Because in the last 18 months, particularly, I think we've done a very bad job of that, because a lot of customers have had pain outside of work, right? I'm sure you have friends and family who've had pain outside of work, right? I mean, the pandemic has caused a lot of pain, economic pain and medical pain. So we've been obviously, by like most others, locked in doing business on Zoom and WebEx and all of these other technologies. While those are fine for what is called transaction, right? You're able to share transaction data that says, okay, do this, do that, review metrics, etc. Progress reports. It's very good for running the business. It's not good for team motivation, for people to share their views, and for people to be, because humans didn't grow up learning how to share their emotions, right? It's very different when you take an employee out for dinner and he shares how he's feeling, when a little bit of trust and camaraderie develops. So I think we have done a pretty normal, average, or maybe even below average job on this one in the last 18 months. Before that, I think we had a much better record on that, because we used to recruit good people. We had really good mission. We were actually growing very fast. There was a lot of promotions to come by. There was a lot of incentives. There was a lot of team meetings and bondings. And so all the usual good stuff that needs to happen in a growing fast company was there. The last 18 months have been a bit tough for us. So I think we are still, I won't be able to give you a good answer of how to do it in the current context. Previously we did it, but frankly, old track record doesn't matter. If you're not doing a good job now, I should tell you that.
Okay, that's nice.
Saiji, we are
question.
Out of time now. Maybe if we can take just one last question and then we'll wrap up the session.
So I guess one last question. I've not read all the questions. There's so many questions still left. So probably this question would be more connected with our auto trade. It's like, what exceptional, it's from Ashish Kale, I guess. What exceptional Swiggy has been doing for a customer-centric approach? This question probably will summarize the entire session of today. Probably.
I think the only exception, I mean, the exceptional thing that we've been doing is very boring. We've been talking to them every day and making sure that we understand how to bucket those insights from those conversations into things that we know we can do and therefore do, or things that we can't do and therefore set expectations and sort of explain to them why we can't do that. And make sure therefore that whether we do A, which is actually give it to them, or B, which is not give it to them, they always feel that we're trying to sort of cater to their needs, and they also understand why we can't do what we can't do, right? If somebody says that why can't you ship something from Bangalore to Mysore, or from, let's say, Delhi to Agra, they understand that when we tell them, sorry sir, we can't have our bikes go 200 kilometers. So it has to be within the city. I'm sorry, we can't do this. I suggest you use somebody else. If they ask us for things which we can't do, we tell them that. If they ask us for things we can do, we explain, we try to do it, and therefore add that service to the business. And if we can't do because we don't have the financial wherewithal, we still tell them that.
That's fine. It's really a good Q&A session, and really appreciate your openness to answer all the questions and the genuine answers that we've got, and I'm 100% sure that it's going to help in our business. Now I'll request Saharsh probably to do the vote of, Vigneshwar to do the vote of thanks.
Thanks so much, Sai. First of all, thanks so much for being on board for the session, Vivek. It's been a fantastic session, and I think all of us have really listened keenly to you. If I can just take a few things away, you talked about customer voice and how listening to the customer is so important. I mean, who else but a customer? Then he's pretty much the best consultant in the world. I mean, we can have consultants from the big five come and talk to us. But as you rightly pointed out, the best consultant in the world would be your customer, as long as we're able to listen to the customer, as long as we're able to, make your business decisions based on that. You also talked about how the employee customer engagement has been so important in your own experience with Volvo at Marshall Motors, Bangalore. I think that's something which we always work towards as automobile dealers, and we have seen success. But you have again reiterated the fact that how important a team is in terms of relationship building, not only in the short term, but you talked about a long-term relationship building where the employee was still engaged with you as a customer well after she left the dealership and moved on.
That's amazing. And she never told me that.
That's fantastic.
By the way, would Marshall be on this call? Are they part of FADA?
They are part of FADA. They are good friends of ours. I will definitely give them a call soon after that.
Because it's amazing. There are so many stories that I have that, I've given them the feedback. I've even given Mr. Trump the feedback, but it's always good to have them on the other side.
Very nice. And again, you talked about scaling up, which was probably one of the first things you took up. Today, we dealers in FADA, we are actually, some of us are single outlet dealers, and some of our dealerships even employ up to about 7,000-8,000 people. So scale is definitely a problem as well as a solution. It's an opportunity, and the ideas of scaling up, of making sure you turn campuses into mini business units and them doing things themselves. I think it's fantastic. Another topic you also touched about is employee empowerment. At the same time, making sure to take a judicious call when the customer's voice is heard. That's again a massive problem in our industry, where sometimes goodwill, as we call it, we hand it over as chocolates, and it also encourages bad behavior at the end of the day. So it's a great balance. We also are trying to learn. One thing I've learned from your voice, we talked about customer voice, but your success and your voice seems to be your favorite quote, which goes, "We don't do a good job of that." That shows that you're not satisfied, even though Swiggy is considered to be one of the best service providers, at least according to most of us, most of the family whom I engage with. I guess these things is not that you're not satisfied with what your team is doing, but you're talking about a lot more opportunities available, and these opportunities could be fulfilled. So thanks again, once again for engaging FADA, for agreeing to be on board this event. Looking forward for further interactions, because we would love if you could interact with us, our members, more. I'm sure in the future it could be a non-virtual function where it's more physical, and we would really be able to interact and learn more from you. I'm really sorry for so many questions not being answered. The time is short, but if you're able to actually write to the Secretariat regarding your questions, we could bounce it off to Vivek, and Vivek, if you're able to have the time to answer some of that, that'll be great for our members. At this juncture, I'd also like to thank Dr. Shyam. He's been the reason why Vivek Sundar is here with us, and thank you so much, Doctor, and really appreciate you bringing on board such eminent people so that we also could move on as an industry by learning not only within our industry, but also best practices from all other successful industries around us. Thank you so much, and please stay safe and take care.
Thank you very much. It's a true pleasure. I have also enjoyed the questions. I'm actually quite impressed that you called somebody who's not from your industry, because it's often you kind of say, what does he know about an industry, which is true. I don't know, but I think the truly sort of true breakthrough happens when you bring in what is called unconnected parts into regular businesses, because when you've been seeing something for a long time, you may not be able to recognize a new way of doing things. In fact, because you're in the car industry, the sort of aeroform shape of fast cars, right, is actually something that automobile engineers didn't think of. It was actually analyzed by biologists who looked at fast birds and fast dolphins and fast things, and they said, what is the exact shape of that beak and that thing, and what is the sort of the way it is cutting through the air, and let's apply that to the fastest cars, and let's also apply that to the fastest trains. In fact, the Japanese bullet trains actually mimic that from birds and dolphins. So if you were to just keep thinking about how to make it faster, sure, you'll make some progress. But if you were to just open your mind to other industries and see if you can reapply something, I think a lot of good things come out of it. So I as a discipline to learn from other industries is something I always appreciate, which is obviously one of the reasons I accepted. But it's been a pleasure. You guys have been truly gracious hosts, because you even spent 20 minutes before the call as the office bearers. So I really appreciate that, and I appreciate the audience for their questions.
So thank you, Vivek bhai. It was really great. Thanks all the attendees who have joined. Hope they have learned a lot, and there's a lot to implement in coming days when we are going through unlock. We'll be surely doing more webinars like this, and let's hope we all join again together. Thank you very much. Thanks, Vivek.
Thank you, everyone.
Vivek ji, thanks a lot.